Hey everyone, time to do part 2 replying to these videos by Snap Jelly on the Swords of Skyrim. We're on to part 2, the bad. And, I think some of the criticisms may be a little exaggerated. The way you present this video is like you're trying to say that these swords all have features that make them completely unusable. Or at least just unusable and unrealistic. But yeah, I've got a few observations myself. Let's just skip the glass sword. I mean, it's a sword made of glass. Yeah, I'm not going to defend that. Yeah, I'm not here trying to just defend all of the swords in Skyrim. I'm just, I'm a guy who's into swords, and it's sometimes fun to examine swords in media from fantasy and try and make observations about them. But yeah. Alright, so let's start with the Elven Sword. With the Elven Sword you were talking about, there's a section of darker material down the middle of the blade. Honestly, I'm not big on Skyrim. I'm more into studying history, and I'd rather be out forging swords, armor, and weapons than grinding and trying to get them in-game. I'd rather be making the real thing. But from looking at that Elvish sword, I'm not entirely convinced that that section in the middle would be a total deal breaker. Because sometimes when I see it, it looks sometimes when I see it, it looks flush. Sometimes there might be just the tiniest little bit of a lip to it. So, there are some swords that had piked backs and T-backs that were often a bit infamous for not being very good cutters, but if it suddenly has like a huge T at the back where it suddenly triples in width right at the very back, yeah, that can be an issue. Though it was something that was done historically. There were famously Kyber knives, and those were big cutting knives, like machete-sized knives. And of course there are some T-back sabers, and even Bowie knives with copper reinforcing around the back of them. And not the best kind of design, in my opinion. But if that center bit is flush, then it should not be a problem. It would be no different to having a forged weld core on the inside. And, if we assume that we're making all of these swords thinner because, well, a lot of the in-game swords are just way too thick in comparison to historical and more realistic portrayals of swords. If we're going to be thinning it down anyway, we could, if it's not flush and there's just a hair of a lip to it, maybe a fingernail's width lip to it, we scale that down with it. It really does not seem like it would be a hindrance to it working at all. As with the where it comes out of being wasted with the wings, and then there's the guard like that. I don't know if I'd be quite so critical of it. Not all swords are meant to be catching blades with the quillins. Sometimes that can just be there to block line. See, that doesn't need to catch a sword. You may be parrying with the weak of your sword, not trying to catch it with the guards. So you can still bat them away. It'll stop them sliding down directly into your hand, but also when you make a cut or your hand goes out in front of you, it can cover the line to your fingers. You should not be able to make a direct cut to my fingers like that. So, I wouldn't be... So, really, I don't think those features are total deal breakers for that sword. Is it optimal? No. Is it unusable? No. So, is it realistic? Yeah, I could imagine something like that actually existing. It could happen. Next sword was the ancient Nordic sword. The step downs and step ups, they're a bit weird. There were swords like that in history. There were some types of Mesa did have that weird set to them, as well as going thin and then stepping out. I'm not too certain about there being step downs on the lead side of the blade, but the thing that was really striking to me was how you were talking about how it's sharp on the back, yet it's an asymmetrical design, like it's meant to be used with a lead edge, and yet there's still a sharpened back edge. Yeah. How exactly would that make it unusable? And on top of that, yes, that was done historically. There are swords with enclosed hilts and both edges being sharp. Types of saber have sharpened back edge, or they might be spadroons. I don't know. It was labelled saber when I saw a picture of it. There's rapiers with sharpened backs, small swords with enclosed hilts, sharpened backs, and basket-hilted swords. So, yeah, asymmetrical swords with a sharpened back were a thing historically, and they would not be a deal breaker in any way. So, yeah, looking at that, thinking of it like a asymmetrical Mesa, that's what it looks like to me. Yeah, I don't see that sword as being a terribly broken or unrealistic or unusable. The dragon bone sword. Funny story about that. Not too long ago I got sent a picture of some daggers and I asked if I could make that for a friend of mine for her sister for Christmas, so I made them, and it wasn't until I saw your video that I discovered what those pictures were actually from, because yeah, I never played the Dawnguard DLC, so I was like, oh, that's why they wanted me to make all that weird shaped knife. Yeah, you can roll in some pictures at the end of this. They're very, very different, but similar profiles. I digress. Yeah, I'm not too keen on the idea of a bone sword. I would hope that dragon bone would be a substantially different material than, well, normal bone, because I've seen what one of the swords I can make can do to bone. Yeah, it would definitely need some iron core in the middle if you don't want someone chopping through it. Again, that steel ridge, if you were going to do that and make it realistic, you would have to make it flush. The scimitar. Yeah, I'm not totally certain that I'd call that design unusable. The bits around the wheel guard, or whatever you want to call it, that have the little notches sticking down, yeah, that's definitely not ideal. But as long as you've got enough room to keep your hand in it and it's not touching it, doesn't seem like it would be a total deal breaker. And I think you had a picture of it where a guy was actually holding it like that, which would imply there's a hell of a lot of room in there because it's got that wheel pommel like on a toolbar, and those really lock your hand in, make it hard for you to incline your wrist. But if you're just holding it, if you're using it with a straight wrist, locked in place, and doing draw cuts like with a toolbar, I don't see how that's a problem, as long as you're not up against the knobbly bits. But even if you did have to tilt it, yeah, I could swing this all day and not have my hand touch the server. So, you know, as long as there's proper distance, I can't really tilt my hand far enough for the Suba to hit me, so there's normally that's not really a deal breaker for me. The spike on the back, the raised bit, I have seen swords labelled as sabers, not sabers, scimitars with a similar sudden raised bit like that where it's saddled on either side. Though more commonly I see them labelled as a Tillich. I hope I'm not butchering that name. I'd love to own some of those swords, they look so nice. Yeah, they do actually, there are actually those that have a similar profile to that, though not as broad. Definitely not as broad. I'm trying, I've been keeping an eye out for a sword, historical sword that actually looks like that, and yeah, I'm just not finding it, except for in China. Some types of Chinese Dao are shaped quite similar to that. The bug sword. Yeah, we definitely would have to assume it must be some kind of anti-mystical bug that provides a decent material. The spikes coming away from you, again, not total deal breaker. I mean, I wouldn't put them on a sword, but I don't think I'd be likely to hit myself with them. You'd have to be kind of a noob. I mean, how often do you see guys training with swords hitting themselves with the back of their own sword? Maybe they do. Not something I think I've ever done. Not on memory. I wouldn't be doing it with a sharp sword. If I'm not going to hit myself with the sharp back edge of a sword, I'm not going to be hitting myself with a spiked back edge of a sword, so... And I'm a spike on the pommel. Yeah, I wouldn't add it, but if you're going to have a spike on your pommel like that, yeah, I'd expect you to be familiar with your sword enough to actually grab and draw it reliably without hurting yourself. Oddly enough, there are some fight manuals, treatises, that depict long swords with spiked ball pommels. Like, there'll be a ball guard, there'll be a spike that way, a spike that way, and a spike that way. So, I'm not aware of any surviving examples, but I am aware of some treatises or manuals that depict them. So, not entirely unrealistic. The most unrealistic thing about that sword is it's made from a bug. It's fantasy, but yeah. It's not how I'd design a sword, but yeah. Ah yes, the Nordic sword from the DLC. Yeah, I wouldn't call that sword broken. That little hook thing, Egyptian Kopesh. I'd seen Egyptian Kopeshes that have a little thingy like that. And I don't imagine it would be that different to using a bearded axe, really. Yeah, it could get hooked up on something, but yeah, so could a bearded axe. I can't remember. I'd have to go and rewatch a lot of Thran's and Elgrim's work doing videos with bearded axes. I think they sometimes use the front tip of the beard to try and start a cut to get deeper into certain materials. I'd have to... I think they may have found it help. Either that or they use the top spike. I can't remember. But you know, if that little bit inside of it is nice and sharp. Wouldn't be a total deal breaker for me. Again, I wouldn't add it to a sword, but I wouldn't say that it makes the sword unusable. And if you still hitting with the area of percussion above that, probably not a big deal. If I was going to make one, I'd either, well, if it was me, I'd just get rid of that thing to make it easier. But if you had to have it, I'd sharpen the inside curvature of it so that it would help. Kind of like a bit like a seatbelt cutter. So, you know, going on a claw, you could maybe make it usable. Not entirely. Yeah, I wouldn't say that kills the design. I'd say that's still a usable, not necessarily ideal, but still I'd say that may be a usable design. The Forsworn Sword. Ugh. Just a spiked club. Now you said that the spike on the end makes it worse than the Aztec version. I'd say that makes it better than the Aztec version, because then you can thrust and stab with it. Saying that you would still be hitting with the sword the same distance up, not true. Not all swords are good at cutting the same ratio up the blade. For example, you get some swords that haven't got very much mass up the top, so you know, you might be trying to, the area of percussion, or the area where you would hit to get the most power out of your cut, would be down lower. Of course, yeah, I could still probably cut with the tip. Yeah, this is a long sword I made myself, and I think I should probably redo the handle. I'm not entirely happy with it. Yeah, I know, it needs to be polished up, but hey, it's a homemade long sword. If you're interested, I have a video showing how to hand forge this Type 15 longsword out of leaf spring with very basic equipment. If you're interested in watching a video on me making a sword. In comparison to that, we have this based from Conway. Very different blade design. This one has a lot more mass up the other end, and well, you'd be able to cut well closer to the end. And yeah, Matt Easton has actually done videos on this subject, that even though a sword may be longer, the ideal place to cut with it may be comparable to a shorter sword. I know I'm probably butchering his argument, but I guess the argument I'm trying to make is, yeah, it might not be ideal to hit right where that end spike joins, but you would be hitting someone if you're going to try and hit them with that sword. You would probably be hitting with wherever's most effective to hit them with, which would be lower down. Just, if you're going to be using it for hitting, just pretend the spike's not there. You use the side with all the spikes, not the tip. And then when you go to thrust, use the tip. Just a few thoughts I've had about part 2 of this series. Alright, I guess I'll see you for part 3. See ya.